She didn't just want his heart, she wanted his entire existence, and she was willing to use high-voltage electricity to make sure he never left her side. What started as a childhood promise turned into a terrifying, lifelong prison. But to understand how a normal friendship spiraled into this nightmare, we have to go back to the beginning. Years earlier, she was just the girl next door with a secret, obsessive crush. The story begins with our protagonist as a boy around 5 or 6 years old. He tried to hide behind his mother's legs because, at that time, he was extremely shy. On the other hand, our protagonist's mother, whose name was Lyama, smiled softly when she noticed how shy her beloved son was. Then she introduced herself to the people standing in front of her, explaining that she and the little boy had just moved into the house next door, and that they would be neighbors from now on. Right after that, Lyama affectionately asked our protagonist to introduce himself and say hello, but his shyness was so overwhelming at the time that he was unable to do so. Immediately afterward, the neighbor's little daughter, whose name was Chiaya, cheerfully introduced herself to Lyama and our protagonist. Shortly afterward, our protagonist clung once again to his mother's legs. Then, with a soft and timid voice, he finally managed to introduce himself to his new neighbors. Meanwhile, Chiaya stared at him with curiosity and fascination. At that moment, she thought he looked very cute because of how embarrassed he was. A few months later, on a rainy day at the park, our protagonist and Chiaya ran as fast as their little legs would allow. They were trying to find shelter so they wouldn't get their clothes soaked. Then Chiaya found a good place to take cover from the rain and told our protagonist to follow her. Of course, our protagonist asked her to wait for him because Chiaya was running too fast. A few seconds later, the two of them were sitting on the ground inside the shelter that protected them from the heavy rain. Chiaya calmly watched the rain fall while casually commenting to our protagonist that the storm was strong and incredible. Our protagonist agreed with her comment. Right after that, Chiaya took a piece of candy out of one of her dress pockets and held it out to him. She told him that even though she only had one, she still wanted to give it to him. Our protagonist looked excitedly at the candy he was about to receive. Then he thanked Chiaya, feeling very happy because of her kindness. After a few seconds, our protagonist gently squeezed the candy Chiaya had given him. Then, in a soft and timid voice, he confessed that he wanted to marry her once they were both grown up because he wanted to take care of her and protect her just as much as she always took care of and protected him. When Chiaya heard our protagonist's words, her little cheeks slowly turned red. Her tiny heart began beating rapidly with excitement, and in a soft voice, she called his name. After a few seconds of comfortable silence between the two of them, she gently told our protagonist that she would happily and patiently wait until that day came so that they could be together forever. 10 years later, after school had ended, our protagonist was walking home with Chiaya by his side. As they walked, our protagonist, feeling a little embarrassed and shy, told her that they were already grown up and now in middle school. Because of that, he thought they should stop walking to and from school together. As for Chiaya, she quickly turned her head and fixed her gaze on him. She felt a little offended by the suggestion our protagonist had just made. Right afterward, Chiaya stepped a little closer to our protagonist. Somewhat upset and offended, she asked him if he really didn't like walking to and from school with her. Our protagonist looked slightly to the right with embarrassment, avoiding making direct eye contact with her. A few seconds later, with his voice trembling slightly from nervousness, our protagonist explained to Chiaya that wasn't what he meant. He told her that it wasn't because he wanted to stop walking with her, but simply because he felt embarrassed, since people might see them together and misunderstand their relationship. As he said this, our protagonist slowly began to blush. After hearing those words, Chiaya moved even closer to him, gently took hold of his arm, and wrapped both of her arms around it. Then, in a loving and cheerful tone, she told him that he looked really cute whenever he got nervous and shy. Our protagonist was surprised by Chiaya's sudden closeness. Then, feeling nervous and embarrassed, he replied that what she had just said wasn't true at all. 4 years later, our protagonist and Chiaya were peacefully studying together for the midterm exams they would have in just a few days. The two of them were now living together in a small apartment they had rented near the university. Right after that, our protagonist slid his notebook toward Chiaya, pointing at one of the exercises with his pencil. He admitted to her that he didn't understand the problem and asked if she could explain how to solve it. Hearing his request, Chihaya happily began explaining the exercise and guiding him through it. She told him that it was actually very simple and that he only had to follow the formula provided in the problem itself, since the formula practically pointed him toward the answer. After listening to Chihaya's patient explanation, our protagonist slowly nodded in understanding and thanked her for her kind help. A few seconds later, Chihaya slowly raised her gaze and silently stared at our protagonist. Her cheeks gradually turned red. There was a small sparkle in her eyes that held countless emotions she had never been able to express over all these years. Chihaya simply admired him while he remained completely focused on solving the problem using the instructions she had given him. She made sure not to miss even the slightest detail of his face. At that moment, Chihaya thought to herself that our protagonist had become a man before her eyes without her even realizing it. Of course, that wasn't something she disliked. In fact, it was quite the opposite. A few weeks later, a university student, after gathering all of his courage, confessed his sincere feelings to the girl he liked, who was standing right in front of him. The girl remained silent for a few moments because she had never expected such a sudden confession of love. That girl was Chihaya. After a few seconds, while trying to be as kind as possible, she gently rejected the young man's confession. Of course, as she rejected him, she was thinking about our protagonist, remembering all the wonderful moments they had shared together from preschool all the way to their current university days. She also thought about the wonderful man our protagonist had become. Right afterward, Chihaya turned around and walked away from that boy, who meant absolutely nothing to her. As she walked away, she wondered when the day would finally come when our protagonist would confess his feelings to her, because she felt it was already time for them to fulfill the promise they had made as children and finally become a couple. As she thought about that, her cheeks slowly grew warm with excitement just imagining it. While Chihaya continued walking, she remained completely lost in her thoughts. In her mind, she imagined her future first date with our protagonist, their first kiss, and all the different experiences she wanted to share with him. Although Chihaya was very patient, she couldn't help wishing those days would arrive as soon as possible. Just thinking about all of that made her cheeks blush even more with excitement, until they looked like tomatoes. And so the days went by. Our protagonist and Chihaya continued living their peaceful university lives. Even so, deep down, Chihaya wished he would confess his feelings to her as soon as possible. Every passing day, Chihaya tried to act completely natural, but it seemed that her excitement and anticipation only continued to grow as she patiently waited for the day when our protagonist would finally confess his love to her so they could at last become a pair of deeply in love lovebirds. Of course, while Chihaya patiently waited for that day to arrive, she made sure to cherish every wonderful moment she spent with our protagonist. She treasured every moment they shared as friends because, according to Chihaya, even more wonderful moments would soon come once they became a couple. A few days later, inside the small apartment they shared, our protagonist walked over to Chihaya. He remained silent for a few seconds, and then, feeling a little nervous, softly called her name. Right afterward, our protagonist looked away shyly and scratched his cheek. Then he confessed to Chihaya that he liked one of his female classmates at the university. Because of that, he asked her if she could give him some advice on buying a gift that the girl he liked might appreciate. In love. Upon hearing our protagonist's words, Chihaya fell completely silent. Her mind tried to process everything she had just heard, but no matter how hard she tried, she simply could not recover from her shock. After a few seconds, Chihaya's mind fell into complete chaos. She kept asking herself over and over why our protagonist had done something like that to her. At that moment, she also questioned why he had forgotten their childhood promise and so easily fallen in love with another woman. A few days later, Chihaya stood completely still in front of the entrance of their small apartment. She stared directly at the two people in front of her. Her gaze was cold, empty, and expressionless. Meanwhile, our protagonist was happily walking alongside the classmate he liked, whose name was Arakaji. Of course, neither of them noticed the expression of the person who was still standing motionless behind them. Chihaya remained in the same place, in absolute silence, not taking her cold, empty, expressionless gaze off the pair. At that moment, unconsciously, she began clenching her fists with all her strength. Hours later, at the university, a special lecture for a specific subject was being held inside a classroom. Only those who were interested attended, as the rest had simply left to rest their minds from studying. In that special lecture, Arakaji was present, searching the entire classroom with her eyes for our protagonist. While looking around, she wondered where he could be, since he had assured her that he would attend with her. Of course, she was also slightly worried, wondering if he was okay or if something had happened to him. On the other hand, inside the small shared apartment, our protagonist was tied up by his hands to his bed. He tried to free himself from the restraints, moving from side to side while still calling out Chiaya's name in shock. At that moment, our protagonist was scared, nervous, and above all, very confused. He did not understand Chiaya's behavior, so he asked her why she was doing this to him. Chiaya remained silent for a few seconds, staring at him. Then, pretending innocence, she asked him the same question he had just asked her. Right afterward, Chiaya's gaze, which had been pretending to be innocent, quickly changed into a completely serious one. Her eyes became empty and cold. Then, in an emotionless voice, she asked our protagonist if he still did not understand anything at all. Our protagonist stopped trying to free himself for a moment and stared at Chiaya. He was even more confused by her words, as he truly did not understand what was happening. Right after that, Chiaya slowly brought her face closer to our protagonists in a slow and intense manner. Then, seriously, she reminded him of the promise they had made as children, that once they reached adulthood, they would become husband and wife. Seconds later, Chiaya let out a small growl. She asked him why he had fallen in love with another woman, so easily breaking their precious childhood promise. She began to blame him for it, emphasizing that she had patiently waited for all those years. Upon hearing Chiaya's words, our protagonist quickly asked if that was the reason she was doing all of this. He also tried to reason with her, saying that he had always considered that promise nothing more than an innocent childhood joke. Our protagonist wanted to continue arguing about the childhood promise, but Chiaya interrupted him before he could continue speaking. Then, angrily, she raised her voice and told him that she would never believe those words, as she refused to accept that the childhood promise she had treasured was just something he had said lightly on that rainy afternoon years ago. Right afterward, Chiaya moved even closer to our protagonist and positioned herself intimately, pressing her body against his so closely that there was not even a millimeter of space between them. Then, in a whisper, Chiaya told our protagonist that she would not let another woman have him, because he belonged only to her and no one else. As for our protagonist simply kept moving from side to side, trying to free himself from his restraints or at least create some distance between them. Then, a little scared and nervous, he told Chiaya that she was acting very strange and, above all, that she was too close to him. Upon hearing his words, Chiaya simply ignored him completely. Then she closed the small remaining distance between them, pressing her body against his in a way that made our protagonist's blood run cold. Chiaya's cheeks at that moment were burning, lost in a heat that only she could feel and enjoy. Then, with a distorted sense of reality, she began telling our protagonist that he was only hers, that he belonged entirely to her. Chiaya also expressed that she would even be his first and only woman. A few seconds later, Chiaya's laughter could be heard throughout the room. Her laughter was soft and extremely sweet. Then she quickly expressed her happiness, saying that they had finally become one, and that this first time between them would bind them together forever, just as it should be. Meanwhile, our protagonist continued moving from side to side, trying again to separate from her, or at least create some distance. But Chiaya seemed to be in another world, lost in total euphoria while clinging desperately to him. At that moment, she expressed her twisted happiness, telling him that they had finally become one, that their union had been completed at last. Of course, our protagonist begged her to wait and stop what she was doing, asking her to understand that this was very wrong. But once again, he was completely ignored by Chiaya. She remained immersed in her own world. Then, with extreme happiness clearly visible on her face, Chiaya told him that what they were doing right now was something only people who truly loved each other did, and that this made her very happy. Our protagonist, now even more scared, tried once again to convince Chiaya to stop. Seeing that he was trying to persuade her, Chiaya's gaze became empty, cold, and expressionless. Right after that, she brought her face closer to his and assured him that the fact his body could not resist her touch meant that he loved her more than the classmate he claimed to be in love with. Chiaya stated all of this with absolute conviction, as if it were an undeniable truth. Days later, in the afternoon, our protagonist was sitting on a bench at the university with his head lowered. He was deep in thought, repeating to himself that what was happening between Chiaya and him was truly wrong. He questioned internally why his body was betraying him, remembering with anguish how he had been subjected to her will again and again over the past days. Our protagonist kept telling himself that he only liked Arakaji, and that he had no romantic feelings toward Chiaya, whom he saw only as a sister. He began to sweat from nervousness as he thought about how he could tell someone about what he was going through. But he quickly dismissed the idea, feeling that it would be very dangerous to try to leave Chiaya, since he did not know how she might react. That uncertainty truly terrified him. Suddenly, Arakaji approached our protagonist, pulling him out of his thoughts. She called out to him softly. He was slightly startled, but then greeted her with a mix of curiosity and nervousness about what she wanted. Arakaji moved a little closer to him and, somewhat embarrassed, asked if he had been worried about something lately. She had noticed he had been very distracted in class these past days, which worried her, so she offered to listen to any problem he might have. Upon hearing Arakaji's words, our protagonist momentarily forgot his worries and slowly began to blush. He stared at her in silence, thinking emotionally that she was very kind and truly cared about him. That kindness was exactly what he had fallen in love with her. Right after that, he swallowed and began to sweat due to nervousness. At that moment, although he was not completely convinced, he considered the possibility of telling Arakaji about the situation he was going through with Chiaya. But before our protagonist could open up to Arakaji, his phone began to vibrate, accompanied by a text message notification. For some reason, he shivered and got goosebumps. A few seconds later, our protagonist's face turned even paler and his gaze remained fixed on his phone screen. He froze for a moment, completely shocked, confused, and very scared. The message was from Chiaya. In it, she asked our protagonist why he was talking to that girl she found so disgusting. After a few seconds, our protagonist finally reacted and began looking around in total panic. He thought to himself that maybe she was watching him somehow. However, no matter how much he searched his surroundings, he could not find any trace of her, so he dismissed the idea. But the message on his phone continued to deeply worry him. What our protagonist did not know was that, at that moment, he was carrying inside his backpack a device that transmitted his real-time location and also included built-in microphones to listen to everything he said at all times. On the other hand, Chiaya could be seen walking calmly through a park near the university campus. She complained to herself internally, thinking that she needed to be more careful and not take her eyes off her beloved, because that homewrecker cat had appeared again to try to get close to him. Suddenly, Chiaya's inner monologue was interrupted when she heard through her earphones Arakaji calling out to our protagonist, worried about the panic he was showing on the other side. Right after that, Chiaya slowly brought a finger to her lips. With a tone that tried to sound calm and innocent, she told herself that after all, she would have to properly tie down our protagonist so that no matter how free he thought he was, he would always end up returning to her. A few seconds later, Chiaya's gaze darkened and her eyes became dull and empty. Countless possible scenarios crossed her mind about what she could do. Slowly, she whispered our protagonist's name softly, but with a dark tone. Hours later, after the university day ended, our protagonist walked back to the small shared apartment. At that moment, he was blaming himself for not being able to speak honestly with Arakaji about what was happening to him. Shortly after, our protagonist stopped for a moment. He thought that at this rate, he might not even be able to have a serious conversation with her. However, he also encouraged himself, convincing himself that he had to speak clearly with Arakaji. Right after that, our protagonist lifted his gaze and looked at the apartment window, specifically Chiaya's room, since the light was turned off. He wondered if Chiaya had not yet returned from the university, because normally when she was home, her room light was always on. A few minutes later, our protagonist entered the small shared apartment. As usual, he announced his arrival out loud, but receiving no response, he assumed that no one else was home. While he walked further inside, he debated with himself whether he should talk to Chihaya seriously through text or face-to-face. Of course, considering the more direct option made him break into a cold sweat at the thought of confronting her. Meanwhile, the door to Chihaya's room slowly opened. From the darkness, a figure emerged, taking deliberately slow steps. It was her. Right after that, she approached our protagonist in a silent and stealthy manner. While doing so, she slowly pulled an electric stun device from one of her pockets. A few seconds later, standing right behind him, Chihaya aimed the weapon at the back of his neck and, without hesitation, pulled the trigger, sending an electric shock through his body. 40 minutes later, our protagonist was moving from side to side. He was desperately trying to free himself from the restraints holding him to the bed. It should be noted that at that moment he felt exposed and vulnerable in that position. On her part, Chihaya was sitting comfortably on our protagonist's lap, staring at him with an expression that pretended to be concern. She asked him why he wasn't listening to anything she was saying. It is important to emphasize that her closeness at that moment felt extremely suffocating and invasive. Quickly, her fake expression of concern was replaced by one of total seriousness, while her gaze slowly darkened. Then, Chihaya confessed to our protagonist that she loved him. She loved him more than anyone in this world. Right after that, Chihaya brought her face closer to his and whispered that, given the circumstances, she could no longer avoid taking the precautions she had planned in order to keep him by her side at all times. She slowly leaned toward his ear and, in a calm and provocative tone, told him that she had convinced herself to wait until they graduated from university to obtain the diploma they had both worked so hard for. Immediately after, Chihaya pulled away from his ear and placed both hands on her own cheeks, which were burning from intense excitement. Then, with extreme happiness in her voice, she admitted that she definitely could not wait any longer, that it was something inevitable that had to happen. Meanwhile, our protagonist had remained silent the entire time because he was gagged. Upon hearing Chihaya's words, his whole body inevitably shuddered. He then looked at her with fear and extreme confusion. Chihaya once again fixed her gaze on him. In her eyes, a dark and twisted glint could be seen. With excitement, she told him that from now on, he had to give her his entire existence. Seconds later, Chihaya slowly placed both hands on her stomach and began to caress it gently and tenderly. She told our protagonist that she wished to carry his child in her womb. She confessed that he would be the only man in the world she would ever be with while she was alive, and the only one with whom she would form a beautiful family. Right after that, Chihaya slowly brought her face closer to his. Her eyes had become dull and dark while a sinister smile formed on her lips. Then, in an extremely sweet and soft voice, she whispered that if she had a beautiful baby with him, they could stay together forever. Upon hearing these words, our protagonist became even more nervous and frightened. His anxiety was through the roof. He looked at Chihaya in a pleading way, trying to express through his eyes that she should please stop this madness. But realizing that Chihaya would not stop for anything in the world, our protagonist began moving desperately from side to side, attempting in vain to free himself from the restraints and escape from her. On her part, Chihaya calmly observed his attempts to escape. With small laughs, she told him to wait and stop moving. Seconds later, seeing that our protagonist was still struggling violently and desperately, Chihaya decided to take out her electric stun device and use it on him once again. As the shock ran through his body, she calmly told him not to get angry, since everything she was doing was for the sake of their relationship. Right after that, while Chihaya fully enjoyed that moment of union, she happily and excitedly assured him that a wonderful life awaited them as a true couple from now on. As she remained lost in her own euphoria, Chihaya confessed that from that moment on, they would live and stay together until both of them took their last breath. Our protagonist could only stare at her, completely terrified and helpless in front of what his childhood friend had become. Meanwhile, Chihaya remained clinging to him. She told him very excitedly that they would have to register their marriage at the civil registry before her womb began to carry his child. A few seconds later, Chiaya raised her voice and declared to our protagonist that she needed nothing else in life. Having him was enough for her to be completely happy and live with total peace and fulfillment. Chiaya looked at him again, fixedly. In her eyes, the extreme happiness and excitement she felt at that moment were clearly visible. She asked our protagonist if her plan for a perfect future together seemed good to him. Of course, our protagonist could not give any opinion on the matter, since in any case she would not take his will into account. 2 years later, our protagonist could be seen returning to what could be considered his home after finishing his workday at the office. Upon entering, he announced his arrival in a monotone voice. He had a tired expression, and his eyes looked empty and dull. On the other hand, Chiaya silently watched as our protagonist entered and slowly approached her. A smile of total satisfaction formed on her lips as she saw her beloved husband being so well-behaved and obedient. Right after that, Chiaya happily welcomed her beloved husband home. She was sitting calmly on the living room sofa, staring at him while gently caressing her 8-month pregnant belly. And so, this story shows us that sometimes yanderes can win and achieve their goal of possessing their beloved ones. And so, the yandere wins. Her beloved, now her hollow, obedient husband, is forever bound by a twisted love and a new life. Because in the end, the only thing that is clear is this: some promises are kept at any cost, and his sacrifice was just the beginning of her eternal, suffocating embrace.